Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are logging on from in the world, and welcome to the latest Infrastructure Intelligence Live event, organised as always in association with communications consultancy BECG. This is the penultimate event of this year. How quickly has this year gone by? Certainly a year like no other, and we'll be discussing that at our final event of the year on the 11th of December, which should be a very interesting discussion and conversation. But equally today, we're expecting a very interesting chat, discussion, insights from an esteemed panel who are gathered here today to discuss winning work internationally, which we think will hopefully help those organizations that are already working in international markets, and also those who, particularly in these times that we're in at the moment, and also with the, I suppose, post-Brexit environment there, I've mentioned the B word, got that in pretty early on today, might be thinking about dipping their toe in the water in terms of working overseas in the future. So hopefully today's event will offer you some insight, some intelligence, and some information on how to go about that. We do have a packed panel this morning, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, and that is Tom Cargill. Tom is the Chief Executive of British Expertise International. British Expertise International is, of course, the leading business development network for UK-based companies exporting their expertise in infrastructure and the construction sector. And they are particularly active in advising on fast-growing, emerging and developing international markets. Tom, who is someone with significant expertise and experience working in the UK foreign policy arena, the trade, international development and infrastructure sectors, I'm sure will be a very interesting first speaker for us this morning. So without further ado, Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's a very kind introduction, and welcome everyone. It's great that so many of you could join us today. So I'm going to just give a few opening comments about where I think we are and where we're going on infrastructure exports for the UK. And as Andy says, British Expertise International, of which I'm the CEO, is the main membership body in the UK for companies exporting infrastructure related services, as well as capacity building or international development. And as part of our role, we spend a lot of time at the interface between government and industry. And that's, of course, really important right now because the UK is really at a crossroads on trade. As Andy has already mentioned the B word, we have Brexit coming up in whatever form that may take. And that's really important. But people often forget the flip side of how we develop a new relationship with Europe, is that we also need to be developing new relationships and opportunities to trade with different parts of the world. And again, as Andy mentioned, for British Expertise International, that puts us in a key position because our focus really is about driving UK infrastructure exports to regions such as Central, Southeast, Southern Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, all the parts of the world that are growing fast or will be as soon as COVID begins to be overcome. And these are all parts of the world where the UK needs to drive greater export growth and efforts. And the good news is, I think that is beginning to happen. I can understand how you'll see the kind of chaos in the headlines around so many political issues at the moment. But I can assure you that behind those headlines, in different parts of the civil service, and Matt, I'm sure, will touch on some of this, there is a surprising amount, perhaps, of strategic thinking and consideration and planning going on around how can the government play its role to refocus exports over the next year or so. The challenge, unfortunately, is that a lot of this isn't making its way out of Whitehall yet. This is still a lot of internal planning, although signs are beginning to emerge and initiatives beginning to be unrolled, and I think we'll see a few more of those announced over coming months. The other challenge is that there's still a tremendous amount of duplication and incoherence in the way that the UK engages on exports, foreign policy, trade, and how all of this is integrated into the UK's place in the world. And of course, this is something that the integrated review that's going on is supposed to be tackling. That's been delayed again, and I think hopeful we'll get signs of that coming out of the system in January now, mid-January. But although, how to put it, the system is this stuff is happening all within the system. As I say, the big challenge is that insufficient amounts of it are yet kind of coming out and emerging as initiatives around which business can really organize itself, and trying to help this process along is something that British Expertise is really working on. And this is particularly important for infrastructure because I think there is a growing recognition within government that getting more UK content into global infrastructure projects it is important for the UK's wider interests and the UK's continued role and influence over things like standards, data, regulatory processes, as well as, of course, the health and vitality of UK business. Unfortunately, our competitors have been becoming increasingly organised in this space for some years. And countries such as France, Spain, China, of course, but Germany, even the Americans have a better track record than us in recent years of supporting their companies to win significant contracts internationally. As we emerge from the current crisis, governments around the world will be putting money into infrastructure, and that's a good opportunity for our companies. But they also will be helping companies based in their countries to win work internationally as well. And perhaps we can go into this more in Q&A, and Matt might touch on some of this. The big challenge for us, all of us here in 2021, is to get the relationship between government, UK government, and industry right in supporting export growth and in inserting more UK content into large-scale infrastructure projects around the world. And perhaps I'll stop there, Andy, and we can perhaps go into more detail on some of this depending on what the questions are. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom, for that. Some interesting points, particularly about the role of UK government and also the need to get UK content into some of those international global infrastructure projects as well. And I'm sure there will be further discussion on a number of those issues, particularly the post-COVID stuff that you flagged up towards the end there, and what that actually means for global spending on international infrastructure going forward. Just a word to our audience. If you do have any questions, then feel free to post them in the chat. If you want to put your company name or organization name that you're attached to, then feel free to do that. I don't mind giving you a name check as far as that is concerned. So just let us have the any questions in the chat. Our next speaker is Bruce Tomlinson. Bruce is the Chief Executive of HR Wallingford. Bruce has got 25 years experience in the maritime industry, including a lot of experience in oil and gas and also significant project experience in that area as well. HR Wallingford's specialist research and consultancy know-how is particularly active in solving some of the world's most complex water-related challenges in particular. And as a not-for-profit organisation, they reinvest their profits back into strategic research. So, Bruce, I know he's on the screen, even though he's not, because he's been saving his bandwidth. So I'll just call in Bruce now to give a short introduction. Bruce, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to risk my my bandwidth and share my screen with you. Basically, great introduction to HR Wallingford, actually. But I thought, by way of intro, I would take a couple of minutes just to introduce HR Wallingford a little bit further, to provide some context as to where we sit in the global market. We are a specialist consultancy focusing on water. We have 300 staff across 8 international offices, ranging from Australia to Malaysia to China, India, through to the Middle East in Dubai, Italy, of course the UK, and over into Houston in the States. Our services relating to infrastructure include desk-based consultancy, water and climate change advisory services, predictive numerical modelling, engineering design and port operations. And we're particularly well known for our physical modelling and our navigation simulation facilities. But key today for our webinar today is the fact that 70% of our work at Wallingford comes from the international market. We work direct for governments, right through to corporates, through SMEs, individual, and right down to individual property level studies. So that's a background to Wallingford. With 300 people, of course, you'll hear from different panel members today, different size companies, but with 300 individuals across the globe, that's a very small number of individuals to try and capture the global market. There are very few countries that Wallingford over the years has not been involved in some way in a single project. But how do we position ourselves to capture that global market, particularly relating to infrastructure? One of the key benefits that we have is that we are a relatively strong brand. We're well known in the water sector. Our scientists and engineers have a great reputation. And as a result, people do know of us and therefore have us in mind when they have a project that we can contribute to. We split the world into regional geographies. So we have 5 different regions across the globe with their own geographic strategies, focusing on a number of core sectors within those regions. We have sector leads that contribute to those regional management strategies. We have those strategic office locations that I've mentioned to you previously. Knowledge of our clients is key, and particularly the way their procurement processes and their frameworks differ across different cultures, different geographies, different sectors. And that's an absolutely key differentiator, and making sure that everybody understands how those rules work and how best to position themselves for individual projects. Personal relationships are therefore key, whether that be with clients or with a key strategic organizational relationship that we have in countries, especially where we don't have offices. We have a network of agents across the globe as well that help us out position ourselves. And of course, we always undertake the usual PR, websites, thought leadership pieces, advertisements where necessary and appropriate, conference presentations and exhibition spaces, like as I'm sure everybody else does as part of our work-winning portfolio. But key to HR Wallingford that perhaps many of you may not know about is the fact that we don't have shareholders, and we're able to reinvest, therefore, our profits, our surplus, as we call it, into R&D. That allows us to innovate and to research and produce new tools, new skills, expertise to ensure that we're offering the most cutting edge solutions to the world's most challenging problems. And that's a key differentiator for us. So that sort of sets HR Wallingford's perspective up, hopefully, for our how do we win work internationally. But today's largely around key trends. What are the key trends that we're observing, whether it's from a procurement point of view or from a sectoral point of view, a political point of view, etc. So I've got sort of 3 or 4 bullet points I'd just like to finish on here to offer into the conversation. From a procurement point of view, over my 5 to 6 years at Wallingford, I've noticed increasingly the requirement to deliver work locally to either where our clients are or to where their projects are. Prior to that, we were singing the virtues of most of our staff being based in Wallingford, able to communicate, get themselves into a meeting room, to troubleshoot, to problem solve, to brainstorm, to produce the optimum result for any particular project. But as I say, increasingly clients are moving away from that. They want us where they are or where their projects are. So that is a key differentiator. And as a result, we've responded to that. 7 out of our 8 international offices now all deliver work locally, largely from a project management point of view, as you'd expect, strategically. Still, most of the work is done technically back in Wallingford, but we produce that interface locally to where the clients are or where their projects are. Sectorally, focusing on energy transition, and particularly in our case, the role water has to play in energy transition, getting the balance right between involvement in current, perhaps less green technology, and yes, we're seeing that evolve into the cleaner tech, but getting the balance right between involvement in the current technologies and the shift to the emerging cleaner technologies is absolutely vital for us. And that is something that, of course, I'd encourage everybody to talk very, very closely at. We've heard Brexit, we've heard COVID. We really need to focus on that as an organisation. So far, we've seen very little impact on ourselves, fortunately, from either COVID or Brexit. But having said that, we're watching the government's commitments to overseas aid, which we've seen recently, particularly over the last 48 hours, the UK government drawing back their commitment to overseas aid to 0.5% of GDP. We do a lot of work with the World Bank and in particular the Caribbean Development Bank, so we're watching closely as to the impacts on that. But that's a challenge, of course, but it's balanced by the opportunity that we in particularly have in relation to climate change. We're seeing increasingly clients recognizing the need to understand climate change trends and associated impacts on existing assets and the location and design of their future assets, particularly, of course, infrastructure related. And that includes the frequency and intensity of storms, sea level rise, droughts and floods experienced in new locations, and the need for infrastructure to help response and manage these shifts. And that includes, from an infrastructure point of view, desalination plants, water transfer operations, water storage, flood protection measures, etc. So what I've tried to do is to balance out from a organisational perspective, how HR Wallingford is positioning itself for international work, how we win our work from a company of 300 people, and the key trends that I'd like to offer into the conversation later on. And I think I've finished there, and thank you very much indeed. I'll come back with any questions and offer more in due course.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Really interesting to highlight the change that you've seen during your working period, to that local delivery, on the ground delivery. Also interesting to flag up as well the importance of clean tech and net zero, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later on, particularly when next year, of course, we'll see the UK hosting COP26. Some great questions coming through in the chat, which I've got down. Keep those coming. Next up, we have our next panelist, and that is Patricia Moore, who is the Managing Director for the UK for Turner and Townsend. Patricia leads a team of more than 2,000 experts at this world-leading professional services company. They have 111 offices around the globe, extremely successful, and I think it's fair to say market-leading in that particular arena. And only this year, Turner and Townsend was the winner of the International Business of the Year category in the 2020 British Expertise International Awards. So they kind of know what they're doing when it comes to hopefully winning work internationally. Anyway, that's enough from me. Patricia, over to you.
Yeah, I need to just, oh, you can hear me. You unmuted me. Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, wherever you are across the globe. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I think the other big prize that we won last year actually was the Queen's Award for Enterprise as well, which is another great accolade that we're very proud of. I think there's going to be a lot of synergy from what you've heard from Bruce, I guess, in terms of how we've grown the company and how we've approached this. We're just perhaps a wee bit further on in the journey. We certainly, started the business in 1946 in Darlington. And we've effectively grown the business out of that UK network. We set out, I guess, first foray into the global markets was probably in the 50s to Africa. But we really meaningfully went from the 1990s, late 90s actually, when Vince Clancy, who's now our CEO, basically took over our international business. And, that international growth we saw was a fundamental plank of our business strategy to really drive diversification in the model and give us, therefore, resilience in our business operations. We've done that with a lot of success, a lot of hard work, and it's largely been through an organic model that we've done that, albeit that we have done a number of acquisitions, but they tend to be fairly small scale in terms of that M&A approach. We operate across our global regions. We are effectively, a wholly owned British company. So we operate as a global partnership, 95 partners around the world in a single operating model. So, we're privately owned. And I guess, what we've been able to do because of that model is really set out with strategic intent, take investments, repatriate cash, invest in that UK business, and use that really as the nerve centre that's driven the growth of the global business. And we've done that with some success now, as you outlined in the introduction, where back in the 90s we were probably 90% of our revenues came from the UK, whereas now 45% of our revenues come from the UK, and we've been able to diversify that quite extensively. And we've done that through a range of different approaches, I guess, but really coming back and being underpinned by having, a very clear business strategy. And I guess the private ownership, I think, lets you take, a longer term view in some markets than others. It lets you, enter a market and be very purposeful, I guess, around those investments and your expectations on the return of those investments. So similar to Bruce, we operate across our global regions in the Americas. The UK, obviously, as I say, is the nerve centre. Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and then Australia and New Zealand. So, we've, as you said, we've done that through, I guess, focusing on our key market segments, which is natural resources, real estate, and infrastructure. And so, we span the whole of construction, I guess, is the message there. And the infrastructure dimensions are quite different, I think, from those other markets. So one of the key ways that we've been able to grow the business is through having global relationships. And, those are real attributes, I think, of the natural resources and the real estate markets that you don't necessarily get in the infrastructure market. So, we started off really through growing global relationships with Nissan and other global corporates, get into domain places with them, and then effectively, growing an office and growing market share really around that, anchored by that key relationship, if you like. So that's really how we've furnished the global organic growth. And the natural resources segment and the real estate segment really lend themselves to that approach. When it comes to infrastructure, what we started to realise, we segmented the infrastructure business in the UK probably about 8 years ago, so that we could bring real focus, drive sector expertise, enhance our offer to clients, but also bring the focus to drive the growth. And that has been a real catalyst for our growth. And we've recently added defence to that category, actually, to within the UK market, which is delivering a lot of growth for us within the UK. But what we started to realise, I guess, was that in infrastructure, it was much more difficult to join the clients up, but we had an offer and a capability that was highly exportable, and that there was a lot of interest, from global infrastructure clients. Really, particularly, it started, I think, with aviation, because the aviation clients know each other. They're very interested in each other, and when you have a flagship client like Heathrow Airport on your books, everybody, all the airports around the world want to understand what Heathrow are doing, and so we were able to take, that best practice really around the world and join the dots on global aviation. Ironically, that's the part of the infrastructure work bank that's been most depleted, actually, through and most impacted by the pandemic. But we're confident that will return. But what it's enabled us to do is take a more strategic approach, I guess, to how we deliver that infrastructure growth around the world. And that has largely been around, brokering, I guess, the view to the pipeline and the opportunities through that domestic office that we have in those locations. Similar, again, to Bruce, where we've taken, we take a range of different lenses, I guess, to look at and examine market opportunity. And that's everything from, desktop analysis to, working with associations to, alliancing or using agents or whatever it is, really to get a view of that pipeline. And I think that's a really key element of, of driving global growth, is you've got to really have visibility of that pipeline. And that can be quite challenging thing to achieve, and of course we all know that even when you can see the pipeline, it doesn't necessarily mean that pipeline is going to happen in the timescales that you understand, or that it's got a certainty of funding, etc., etc. So I guess we approach that through a range of different ways. We look at that sectoral lens, and we have those global sector leads like Bruce, outlined in his introduction. We have global key account managers who give us a lens on the clients' investment opportunities and spending plans. We broker, again, those government relationships with those domains to help us share intelligence and get an understanding of that. And of course, I think another key way is through alliance partners. So whenever we target a big opportunity, then we'll alliance. We don't do design and we don't do construction. We really, really focus on management expertise and bringing that management expertise to the delivery of major programs. So it means that we can plug and play quite effectively with some of the other multidisciplinary organisations. And when the scale and the complexity is sort of leading towards that, then that's a key strategy that we'll use to go and convert an opportunity is through that alliance partner arrangement. And of course, we'll do that with global players, and we'll also do it with local players. So that's a great way, I think, to share intelligence and understanding really of pipeline, timelines, etc. I guess the other key things that we're looking at. So I think the key considerations are absolutely around understanding the pipeline, understanding the timescales of that pipeline. There's also a big thing around do you want to be in that country, or do you want to trade in that country, and what are the compliance restrictions around that? And that's everything, I guess, from how stable is the political system, how effective is the legal system, what are the language and the cultural considerations, what's the payment regime like, and how easy is it to get paid, and how easy is it to repatriate your cash when you do get paid, etc. So it's there are many, I think, considerations, and there are also lots of tax considerations as well, cross-border trading. So I think you have to kind of look at all of that in the round and look at the scale of the opportunity and the attractiveness of it in the round. And I think the other thing, I guess, that I would encourage people to really think about is, what is your proposition? Why would that domestic market want to buy us? What is it that's different? What is it that you're offering? And I guess, for us, that, a good example of that is the fact that we do have this global footprint that we can join up. And a key part of our strategy and servicing our clients is, if you buy us, in Singapore, or if you buy us in London, you get the same experience, you get the same offer. There's consistency of how we deliver our service. And also, we can harvest the data and the knowledge from, 100 global programs around the world of, that are greater than £1 billion in capex that we are involved in. And that's a key differentiator for us. So I think you have to really think clearly around what is your offer, why you, but also I think increasingly, and I think, on the trends point, I think increasingly there is this, gone are the days when we could service things on an expat basis, and we'd largely initiated our growth on an expat model. But what we are very, very focused on doing now in our global businesses is really driving that localization agenda, because that's a key consumer trend, I think, that goes across not just our industry, but, across the world, really, in all markets, is that, people, society is expecting business to be much more responsible. And part of that is the localization and the driving value and upskilling and the social value agenda in each of the domains. And I think in the UK, the Social Value Act has driven us to really think long and hard about how not only what our contribution is, but how we capture it, measure it, evidence it. And we can see that will be a trend that just continues on, really, through public sector demanding it and mandating it, but also private sector finance really starting to pick that up as well. So I think that's a key thing. Now, we're really pleased, I guess, that we're quite a way down this journey, and we have the ability, I think, to really focus on that localization agenda, having built real critical mass across those offices. So I think there are many other trends that are coming to the fore in terms of the market desire. And I think, the carbon equation, smart cities, the demands of the market, I think, will be, a real benefit to us in the UK, because we are, we're leading on many of these areas. And the fact that we've got a CV in it, and we've got key capabilities and good stories to tell and good knowledge to bring, I think stands us in good stead, really, for driving hard on that global growth. But I do think that we've got to do it responsibly, and we've got to think about what is our legacy and our offer back to the domain countries and the domain industries, really. So that's it from me as a way of introduction. I hope I wasn't too long there, Andy.
That's fine. That's great. And some really, really sharp points I think you made there. Some of the really practical stuff about alliancing, partnering, getting paid, obviously a critical part of any international project. Really pleased to hear in this context as well, the issue of social value coming out, because I think it's really important across the piece. And especially, I think, when we're talking about that value that we really offer in the international marketplace. And I learned something that I didn't know as well, and it's given me a headline in my head, because I think in headlines, because I'm a journalist. Didn't realise that Turner and Townsend started off in Darlington. So yes. From Darlington to Dubai. I was frantically looking on the internet when he was speaking to see if he did anything in Djibouti. But Djibouti, but I couldn't find anything, because that appeals to my alliterative headspace. But anyway,
so next year's our 75th anniversary, actually. So
well, you can have that headline for nothing, by the way, free of charge, from Darlington to wherever, somewhere beginning with D, Dunstable. Anyway, so there you go. Anyway, we must crack on. We'll follow up some of those points. I know we will during the course of the discussion. Our next speaker is Alex Challoner, and Alex is Managing Director of the advisory company Cavendish Advocacy. Cavendish operate out of their Westminster and international hubs in Brussels and Washington, DC, and they've been working with clients with their political and corporate communications advice on a national and international level for many, many years. Their people have backgrounds in Parliament, the civil service, local government, politics, think tanks and journalism. So I think it's fair to say that they know their stuff. And I think they can be particularly helpful when people are looking at areas of the world to go and work in, to get a handle on some of the geopolitical stuff that's going on, just what is happening, what's up, what's down, how are things developing. And I think I'm really looking forward, having given him that magnificent build up, to hearing what Alex has got to say. So Alex, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. No pressure there, but no, that's a fantastic introduction. Thanks very much. And yeah, as Andy set out there, we're a not just a UK-based advisory service. We're international as well. But what I'd stress, because I've had a good look at the people, companies as part of this webinar, is that while some of the client base, yes, it is large global corporates, it also translates down to much smaller businesses as well. So hopefully some of what I've got to say is of relevance to you all. But I just want to say what a challenging and fascinating year it is in terms of winning more work internationally. I've never, well, no, I don't think anybody in their lifetime has ever sort of dealt with a year like this. And I personally was affected by it when I was just about to jump on a plane to go and speak to some US agencies in mid-March, and suddenly dear old President Trump suddenly reversed his travel ban on the UK, and sort of no longer were we exempt along with Ireland, and we're all in the same boat. So I sort of experienced personally, sort of firsthand, how that sort of frustrating sort of human aspect of us trying to win work internationally has been, in terms of just simply trying to get from A to B. And I think it's just worthwhile reflecting a little bit on what 2020 has taught us, because certainly as a sort of a political expert, I have never ever seen the extent of the political interference in our day-to-day business in terms of trying to do business on an international basis, whether it be travel bans, quarantine, travel corridors. And that was even before, you know, and that was after the row we had earlier in the year around trade embargoes, when the US was really cranking up the pressure with China. So it's been a very, very challenging year. But I do think 2021 is going to give us some better opportunities on a global, and I hope that translates down to a countrywide basis. I mean, whatever your politics, and I'm not going to second guess on this call with people, but the era of Trump is coming to an end. And I think that is an important sentiment to clock, because while President Trump oversaw period of growth in the American economy, you know, fueled by tax cuts, it also created a lot of instability and a lot of edge and tension right around the globe. And I think any successful business selling products over the world, I think the change in the US administration is going to help in that respect. I think the other thing to clock on a sort of a global basis is, and I think it is genuinely interesting how the new Biden administration is going to get on board quite substantially with the whole European global climate project. And I think that is going to be very significant for all of us, particularly in worldwide, national, international infrastructure, and how that pans out, because I think that's going to have some very far-reaching consequences. And I think one of the sort of early indicators in all of this as well is going to be the first fiscal stimulus that President Biden-elect tries to introduce. I mean, it's very clear from the American example, and I'm sure this is going to play out right across the globe, the sort of build back, build better mantra of President Biden in terms of his response to the global pandemic, I think is going to be emblematic of what else is happening across the world. So again, I would hope to see another big business opportunity for infrastructure companies within that. And I touched upon earlier the sort of the top-down green revolution. I think that is just going to really crack on at quite an important pace in 2021. And it's just very fortunate, I think, just turning to the UK for the moment, that we've got a year coming up where we will be chairing COP26, which I think will give the UK quite an important international platform going forward. But also we're going to be chairing the G7. So I think that you know, what government is doing, the way in which our political leaders are being perceived on a worldwide basis in 2021 is going to be important for British companies wanting to do business overseas. So I think having those two international platforms is going to be very helpful. Clearly there's going to be a conversation around Brexit. You know, let's just talk about the B word for a moment. You know, hopefully within, you know, the next week or so, we'll be coming to the end of sorts, you know, to our own little mini psychodrama that's been playing out and dominating our lives. I'm an optimist on this. I do think we will clinch some form of deal. It won't exactly be the deal that everybody would have wanted. I think we've been going in this direction for a while now of a harder Brexit. And that wouldn't have necessarily been the Brexit that most businesses would have wanted. But a deal is still a deal nevertheless. And I think that will hopefully give us a firm basis for doing more work internationally with our European partners moving forward. So I sort of painted a few sort of thoughts there as to sort of why I think 2021 is going to be a better year and hopefully a more conducive year to doing work internationally. Very happy within the questions to sort of drill down into sort of much more nuts and bolts on that. The last point I'd just leave everybody with is that while I do see 2021 being, as I said, a better year, I mean, it's clearly got to be a better year if a vaccination is on the horizon. I think there is a lasting impression, though, that it won't be a return to normal. I don't think any business can expect that over what has been a tumultuous year. And what I'd say for any business, and it's been touched on by a lot of people speaking before me, is that, you know, good corporate citizenship, how your business is perceived in your local market, national market, international market is going to be very important in 2021. COVID, a lot of these issues have sort of thrown up some real problems to the world, and seeing firms doing good, making a contribution, particularly to their market areas where they're doing business, I think is going to be important and a mark by which some companies are going to be judged.
Thanks very much for that, Alex. As ever, some really interesting insights there. Again, another mention for the environment, the green revolution, as you called it, and obviously the end of an era, albeit a short era, in America, with the advent of Joe Biden's presidency. And the one thing that strikes me about that, apart from anything else, is the fact that they're back at the table in terms of the Paris Agreement, I think, which hopefully will be of fundamental importance going forward to the worldwide fight against climate change. Let's hope so. Anyway, right, our next speaker is the Managing Director of BAM Nuttall, Martin Bellamy. BAM Nuttall, of course, is part of the Royal BAM Group that's listed on the Dutch Stock Exchange, one of Europe's largest construction companies, employing more than 20,000 people globally, with an annual turnover of £7 billion. Martin is responsible, amongst other things, for the company's international business operations, and he's got extensive experience in major civil and marine projects and others on an international basis. He also was previously MD of BAM International as well. So I think it's fair to say that Martin knows quite a bit about this subject, like all of our panelists, otherwise they wouldn't be on the panel. So, Martin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thanks, Andy. Thanks for the introduction there. Yes, I'm going to try and give a contractor's perspective to try and win work internationally. In my current role, I'm more focused on UK right now, but we're still keeping an international kind of flavour. We're currently doing work down in Antarctica, building a port, in the Falklands, also building a port, in Sierra Leone in Africa, building a dam and a water reticulation. And we're just finishing building an airport in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So a fair bit of experience currently on the books. And as you mentioned, I used to head up the international business for our company, which is looking for work responsibility outside of Europe, which covered from Australia to Far East, Middle East, Africa, and even Central America. But I guess for this discussion, I tried to decide to, rather than focus on everything, to focus on Africa. I thought it was try and give some insight from a contractor's perspective. And I guess there's two reasons why I follow that there. Is first of all, I'm quite passionate. I believe Africa has real potential. And secondly, if you look at the amount of ODA funding from British government, 2/3 of the funding goes into Africa. So it's 4 billion, so it's a huge amount. Although I have to admit, that has probably changed in the last kind of 48 hours. So I'm not too sure what the impact is there. But just to give some insight into Africa, and these are kind of my own personal views and very general. But as an overview, Africa to me has huge potential. In my view, it could become the powerhouse of the world. Although I have to say that I've been saying that for the last 15 years, and it's still got to still evolve and develop into that. But generally, Africa has solid economic growth, greater than 4%, and especially East Africa, where it's probably more at 5 or 6%. I'm not too sure exactly how COVID-19 is kind of affecting that, but I guess it's pretty similar around the world. But Africa also has a huge amount of mineral wealth and natural resources, so huge potential there as well. And one of the biggest challenges is that there's a massive population growth. And in more recent times, that huge population is now becoming more urbanized. There's a huge urbanization process and a massive growing workforce. So if you have a product which you can sell there, huge potential and huge opportunity. There's also a huge need for infrastructure. Africa generally needs ports and roads, railways, but also electrification and water supply. So to me, a great opportunity and kind of should be an area of focus. However, there are some downsides to that. In general, in my view, is like it struggled to leverage on that growth, and you could say it kind of failed to deliver or live up to its potential. Some of the countries also have incurred massive debt, which creates kind of challenges in terms of IMF controls and regulations. And in general, Africa has instability issues with its political or kind of safety and security. So things can change overnight. So you can invest a lot of time in developing projects, and then things change overnight. Also, low productivity is always a challenge, especially in construction. So being able to be aware of the productivity scales there is a challenge. And dare I say, corruption is something one needs to be, have considerations and is a factor. But for me, it's a great opportunity. It's an exciting market with some real opportunities, especially if you can harness some of the kind of the link to some of the UK funding and opportunities. DIT has extensive offices throughout Africa through the embassies and high commissions, but there's a lot of UK funding. So whether it's export credit, there's also the IE UK board, which is Infrastructure Export Board, which is a collaboration between British government and business, which I'm actually a board member and a member of. So if there are real opportunities there, you can bring that to the board or to the various kind of UK government bodies, and real opportunity there. And I guess from a British perspective, there's probably 7 or 8 countries where there tends to be a focus on, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa. And you all know Theresa May went over there 2 or 3 years ago. So a real focus on British government. Boris Johnson had that conference at the beginning of the year for all the heads of state of Africa. So a huge focus, and from a government point of view, to try and develop Africa. From a contractor's perspective, the local competition is not as mature, so that creates opportunity. So you can bring kind of technical skills there as well. Having said that, there is a large international kind of competition there as well. So whether it's Chinese or Japanese, one needs to be aware of that sometimes there isn't always a level playing field. I guess for me, looking at some of the challenges for Africa, one of the frustrations which I've always felt there from a personal point of view is what I call Africa time. Things do take a long time to develop. There's a lack of sense of urgency. You can go to a meeting in 1 month and follow up next month, and not a lot happens. So you have to have a real passion and to drive things forward and make it happen. You also have to be prepared to invest a lot of time and money. Things don't happen overnight. So developing a project could take 2-4 years to develop, and could also be potentially derailed at any time. So there's always a risk factor though, in investing a lot of money up front in trying to bring jobs home. So that's a challenge. And then also I mentioned about debt. There are kind of some constraints from IMF. So they put a lot of controls on various countries and about the amount they can borrow, which also affects British funding as well. So one needs to be kind of aware of the IMF controls and regulations there as well. So I guess to kind of, for me, as a summary and advice in terms of strategy, I think it's important to choose or focus on your target market or target countries. That's key. One needs to invest time. There are no quick wins in Africa. It does take a long time to develop projects. It's important to have a local presence there as well. You can't do things by remote. You need to have people on the ground. It's about relationships, following through and being able to push things through. And I think the last thing I will say is really in terms of kind of being able to capitalize on that link to that UK funding or UK export credit. There's a huge opportunity. So that's just a little bit of insight from my own personal perspective about Africa. I'm happy to take any questions on Africa or contracting in general. So Andy, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin, for that comprehensive sort of overview, by necessity brief, introducing this concept of the African powerhouse as well. Let's hope that comes to fruition, highlighting the importance as well of being in it for the long term, both in terms of money and also time, and also highlighting, I think, some very interesting links with government that need to be mined and developed by firms who are working overseas, which leads us neatly on to our next speaker, he says, which is Matt Crossman, who's the Deputy Director for Infrastructure at the Department for International Trade, no less. And I always say on these occasions when we have representatives from the government, in its broader sense, I hasten to add, that we're not expecting Matt to be answerable for all of the government's policies in relation to international trade. Perish the thought. Well, not until the question and answer session later on, anyway. But for those that don't know, and I'm sure there won't be many, the Department for International Trade is a United Kingdom government department which is responsible for striking and extending trade agreements between the United Kingdom and non-EU states, as well as encouraging foreign investment and export trade. And as many of the speakers have already mentioned, they have benefited from assistance from the department during the course of their work on an international scale. Anyway, Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and I'm delighted to be here. Really grateful for you making that possible. I'm going to start with what Ronald Reagan said were the 9 most terrifying words in the English language. And he said they were, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So having left that with you, I'll give you a little bit of background about me, and then I'll move on to what themes I think we'll see in 2021, and then a little bit more about how the IT, the Department for International Trade, can help. So I'm a civil engineer as well as being a civil servant. I spent the last few years at the National Infrastructure Commission, and I've only started quite recently at DIT. So I'm really keen. It's been really useful to hear what the other speakers have said. I'm keen to listen, and I don't pretend to have all of the answers yet. But I do believe that infrastructure is incredibly important, both in terms of the market value globally, and we're talking about trillions of US dollars every single year, and in terms of the impact. So, infrastructure is critical for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is really, really important. I think UK companies are uniquely well placed to help achieve sustainable infrastructure globally, but we haven't always been as joined up as we could have been, and we haven't perhaps communicated as well as we might have. Looking ahead to 2021, I'd identify 3 broad themes, and you've heard of them all before, so I'll be really quick, but I think there's a theme around recovery. So we're recovering from the coronavirus, we're establishing the new normal, we're rebuilding the economy. I think there's a key role for infrastructure there, both in the UK, and we've seen the publication of a national infrastructure strategy over the last couple of days and the spending review announcements, but I think we'll also see that fiscal stimulus operating internationally. I think there's a real opportunity for UK companies in that. The second theme is around resilience. And again, we've had the shock from the coronavirus, we're still in that, but I think there will be an increasing emphasis on doing what we can to make sure infrastructure can keep countries running, making sure that the supply chains are in place, making sure that we can manage the other risks that we face, the other existential risks. So that includes things like climate change. And the third theme for me is around relationships. And Tom talked about relationships right at the start. I think they're really important at different levels. So the international relationships, the Japan trade agreement that was announced a few weeks ago, the Canada agreement that was announced more recently, and there's an aim within DIT to secure agreements with countries around amounting to 80% of trade within 3 years of leaving the EU. So there's an enormous amount of work going on to secure those international trade relationships. But the relationships within UK are also really important. And I'd return to Ronald Reagan's words. I'd return to the fact that it's really important that government does what it does best, but that we leave companies to get on and do what they do best as well. So I think there are really different roles for government and the private sector. We can't act as companies' marketing departments, but we can help and support and encourage and facilitate. And it's really important that we do that effectively. As Martin said, within DIT, we work alongside companies in Infrastructure Exports UK. It was really good to see Martin and Tom at the recent board meeting that we had earlier in November, alongside our new co-chair, so Mark Holmes from Mace, who's taken up the co-chair role from the private sector, alongside our Minister Stewart. And that was a really constructive discussion, and I think the board, it's fair to say, is being reinvigorated. It's got a new purpose, and it's marching ahead. We had really good engagement from the companies, agreeing to take a lead on developing more opportunities and prioritizing markets. So really good opportunities there. We talked a bit at that meeting about government-to-government agreements and the Peru work that I think others will be very familiar with, and the work we've got underway within the department to do more in that area. Similarly, there are real opportunities. We heard from Martin about the different contractors active, the different countries active in Africa, China and Japan principally. There are opportunities, we believe, to collaborate with some of those countries in third markets, so to work along them a bit more. Finally, I'd point to the Global Infrastructure Programme, which colleagues across government have been active in, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, the Centre for Digital Built Britain have been delivering internationally around BIM, some of the digital technologies, and around the 5 case model, making sure that the UK approaches are well established in some of these emerging markets. And sorry, the very last thing is around finance and the importance of finance. I think that's come up in some of the questions. It's something Martin mentioned as well. UK export finance do an amazing job to support UK companies exporting, to help them win export contracts, to make sure they can fulfill the orders and to make sure they get paid by ensuring some of the contracts. So I think UK export finance have a real role to play in this as well. Thanks very much, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt, for being from the government and coming to help us. Thanks very much from that. First Ronald Reagan quote we've ever had on one of our on one of our events. So so that's congratulations for that, and also for outlining the 3 R's: recovery, resilience, and relationships. I do so like it when people talk in sound bites. It makes it so much easier for us to report on these events after the fact. So thanks for that. I'm sure, in fact, I know we will have some questions for you in the discussion, which will take place after our next speaker, who is Nathan Holloway, who's Managing Director for Management and Surveying at WYG, an award-winning professional services firm operating in more than 50 locations across the UK, Europe, Africa, and Asia. Nathan's role includes responsibility for working around the globe on some of the world's most important projects. So he's got significant experience to draw on when he addresses us in the next 5 seconds. So Nathan, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Andy. As you said, I'm Manager Director at WYG and responsible for our account with the Foreign Commonwealth Office. For those of you who are unaware, WYG was acquired by Tetra Tech in 2019. And Tetra Tech is a global consultant consisting of around about 20,000 high-end project managers, designers, asset managers, and scientists. We're located around about 450 offices, and we lead with science to deliver some of the world's most important projects. Now, I joined the business in 2002. I think it's fair to say that at that point we were largely domestically focused. What I was going to talk about today is how we made a conscious decision to expand our geographic reach and how we developed our international capability. One thing that's important about international work, in my opinion, that's if you fail to prepare, then you should prepare to fail. Our preparation for international work started with a selection of preferred clients. We made a conscious decision to target HMG as we felt that payment terms and approach to duty of care was more robust. We wanted to be capable of assuredly delivering everywhere for them, including in fragile and conflict-affected states. And I'm pleased to confirm that we're now responsible for either designing or constructing schemes for SCDO in multiple locations with a real geographic variety, such as San Francisco to Lagos, Ottawa to Bamako. We look after disaster resilience and recovery work in Anguilla, and also supporting design of facilities in Tehran. We also deploy multiple teams in support of HMG's estate management needs, and our international development team supports multiple programs for SCDO across the globe. In order to successfully deliver projects, I think it's imperative that we obtain an early understanding of project pipeline so that we have time to prepare. This allows us to consider ethical considerations and to conduct due diligence on local partners. And I absolutely agree with the points that both Patricia and Martin put forward on the importance of localization. We found that we really benefit from local delivery. It gives us an opportunity to understand local standards, look at local materials, make sure we don't fall foul of local taxation requirements. Visa and permitting needs are streamlined and we get a good understanding of those. And I'd go so far as to say it's largely impossible to deliver major infrastructure projects overseas without a strong emphasis on localization. When we do need to deploy colleagues, then we do take time to consider our duty of care planning. Obviously things like inoculation, security clearances, visas, evacuation plans for some locations need to be put in place. And we think hard about planning for all those what-if type scenarios, making sure that the safety of our people is an absolute top priority for us. Deployment management was really tough before COVID-19, and it's even more complex now with a variety of quarantine and testing requirements in place. This does lead to commercial risks that perhaps we couldn't have foreseen when we were putting fee proposals together in the past. And the key thing there is that our strength of our relationship with the client is fundamental so that any fluid changes can be discussed openly and accommodated. Bottom line for us, though, is that the team need to understand exactly what's required, how we go through all the various gateways, and we need a team that's motivated to deploy to challenging locations. There's a few other structural elements that we put into the business as well to support this capability, one of which was an internal travel booking capability. That is linked to duty of care tracking, We also made sure that we had cyber security capability in place just to make sure that all information management was robust. We've got a strong emphasis on personal security training, and security clearance is a fundamental aspect of making sure that we're fit for purpose and ready to actually deliver these projects. We really look at overseas delivery as a competence, which is developed and assessed much like any other technical skill. So we go through a staged approach to making sure that someone's ready to work overseas if they are going to deploy. We don't just send somebody who's never worked overseas to deliver a project in somewhere like Lagos, for example. So what does this all mean? Well, I'm pleased to confirm that since we sort of started this journey, looking at our internationalisation, we're now delivering multiple projects around the world, not just for HMG, but also for a number of private sector clients as well. Now we've demonstrated ability. And our overall revenue this year is around about £70 million and growing significantly. And that's based upon our UK team supporting clients overseas. In terms of emerging trends, I think we've already touched on the importance of carbon reduction. One thing I'd perhaps point to is the fact that whilst UK has set net zero targets, which does apply to their international portfolio, there is also a range of other local carbon emission targets, which we need to consider in the way we deliver projects, just building again on that localisation agenda. We also need to recognise that there is a reduced ability to travel at the moment, and flights, the airline industries have been heavily hit, so there is less flights available, costs are going up. One way we're looking to mitigate this is through a possible recognition of Five Eyes security clearance. So those Five Eyes partners working in collaboration and hopefully being able to recognise each other's security clearance. And we've had some good progress with that in Ottawa recently, where we're currently overseeing the construction of a new $40 million High Commission, and we're using our local team in Canada to manage that project, making sure we can reduce costs and reduce risks associated with travel. In terms of development, obviously we're all waiting to see how the merger between FCO and DFID will settle in. I don't think it's fully settled yet. And obviously there's some concern about how the reduction in the aid budget may impact upon future pipeline projects. I don't think any of us know what the final deal is going to look like for Brexit, but we're already sort of talking to the client about how visas might need to be considered and what impact might be for travel programs. But overall, I think the prospects for UK business working overseas is good. There is a need to work within a global market. And we're working on projects at the moment funded by FCDO, which is looking to put in place improved diplomatic estate to support trade relations. Some of the big investments in the Sahel, New York, San Francisco, Beijing, New Delhi are all there to support UK business being more successful overseas. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Nathan. Again, some interesting points. The importance of preparation, both in terms of before you actually go into a market, but also preparation of employees and looking at the risks as well involved. Pleased to hear you talk optimistically at the end that you thought there was good prospects going forward for UK firms working overseas, and also again highlighting the important role of government in all of this. So we've got about half an hour for discussion and questions. Obviously, we've got 7 people on the panel. We've got quite a lot of questions, which I'm going to draw on both from the chat and elsewhere. So if our panelists can be as brief as they possibly can when they reply, and then we can get more questions and discussion in. I won't go to everyone to answer every question because we'd be here all night, and nobody wants that. But anyway, I'm going to kick off with the first question, or a first question, from Marcus Clissold-Lesser from the social research agency Traverse, and I'm going to pose this question in the first instance to Patricia. Marcus says that given COVID social changes, to what extent do you foresee a change to infrastructure requirements worldwide? How should UK PLC react to meet them? So, what are we likely to see, going forward as a result of COVID, and particularly change in infrastructure requirements? Do you have a view on that? Just need you to.
1 minute, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think the biggest, obviously the biggest subsegment of infrastructure is transportation, and that's the area that's been massively impacted, both in the immediate term. It was the first indications of the pandemic as we started seeing the reduction in flight traffic, and then how that's really deeply impacted infrastructure, and the aviation clients in particular. But I think the other element that you do start to wonder about is what is the long-term viability of the infrastructure investment in even the mass transportation schemes. And those are really, really significant planks of the infrastructure market. I think so you could stand back and say, well, even if you take the UK position of why are we investing in high speed 2 and no one's going to be travelling anywhere and everyone's going to be working from home, and actually it's all about digital technology. I think that's probably quite an extreme position. And I think also what we've got to be really thinking of is the fiscal stimulus opportunity that the investment in infrastructure brings. So, I think you can look at, even if you look at our government's position and what it's done and what it's published this week in the National Infrastructure Strategy, really encouraging to see, still long-term investment in those major schemes. And I think the only casualty that we've really seen is Crossrail 2, which is much more of a levelling up, correction rather than we don't see the efficacy in infrastructure transportation spends. So I think, transportation investment will continue. There probably is a question mark around the next wave of long-term major infrastructure schemes and the viability of that. And we're already seeing changes to those investment profiles anyway. And we're working, for instance, on Virgin Hyperloop, where we're looking at how you get, a much more carbonised transport system, or decarbonised transport system. I think the other thing that the pandemic has really done is accelerate that carbon agenda. So I think we will see an increased flavouring, I guess, of the carbon favoured investments in the infrastructure pipeline, and that's a great thing. So, will we see increased prevalence and faster investment in digital technologies and digital infrastructure? I think yes, because we've all understood actually that that is key and is critical for the future. So I think there will be a medium to long term, perhaps reprofiling and of those investments, but in the short term, any scheme that's already ready to go or is in contemplation, is basically needed to drive the fiscal stimulus and drive that recovery that we've been talking about.
Thanks, Patricia. Bruce, what's your view on that? What kind of changes do you think we might see in terms of the type of infrastructure that's going to be required going forward as a result of what we've come through really in the last, almost 9 months, really?
Thanks, Andy. I was really hoping you were going to come to me next, actually, because I'd just like to pick up on something that Patricia was talking about, which is the IT infrastructure. We've all got used to working from home. We've demonstrated to ourselves how effective we can be from the perspective of working remotely, both in the UK and internationally. And of course, internationally, if you've got people delivering internationally, you get the benefit of working around the clock. But I just see IT, apart from transport, I see IT infrastructure huge going forward. Our ability to communicate in the way that we're communicating now, the reduction I definitely see in transport, the requirement to travel, both from a time point of view, from a global environmental point of view, and I definitely see we'll see a reduction in that. I think the requirement for office space in terms of infrastructure, if you include office space within infrastructure, I don't necessarily see a 50% reduction. I think people will continue to work from home to a degree. I think people will also want to balance out coming into the office. And I do, we can go into a whole debate about why there is an advantage to working in offices. But as a guide, I think individuals will want more office space around their desks. That's what I've heard from the property industry, the commercial property industry, that we should all expect a demand for more personal space around our desks in the office. But as a rule, we should expect about 50%, 40 to 50% reduction in people coming into the office. So infrastructure around offices and infrastructure around IT, I think, are absolutely massive opportunities for anybody who's involved in that sector.
Thanks, Bruce. Just continuing that theme, just turning to Martin Bellamy. What's your view on that digital transformation issue? How important do you think that'll be going forward? There's already talk, isn't there, in this country about one of the things that the pandemic has actually uncovered is the sort of patchwork quilt in some areas of broadband capability. I mean, looking at on an international basis, that there must be some areas that are, extremely poorly served. That could that be a growth area going forward in your view?
Most definitely. I think the way we do business has transformed, and I think that there's been some good lessons learned. I mean, I used to spend my life on airplanes, traveling around to meetings, and now I can be in the same office and be meeting up in Scotland or in Tanzania all in the same day. So I can see huge potential. Probably looking at it from a different perspective, I'm seeing this also as great opportunity because the economies around the world have obviously suffered, and infrastructure is a way of trying to boost an economy. For every pound in the ground, you get £3 going back into the circular economy. So infrastructure, we're seeing it now in the UK, and they are pushing infrastructure spending. So the infrastructure in general in Africa, for example, where I was talking about earlier, the need is still there. And I can see that if they want to try and help revive economies, it's a good way to promote it. So digital and infrastructure in general, I see as being very positive going forward.
Thanks for that, Martin. I just want to turn to Tom Cargill for a second. He got a question here. It's from Bartolome, who says, when you spoke earlier, you said that countries like Germany have a better track record in supporting businesses win work internationally. And Bartolome's curious as to how you measure that, or more precisely, what German authorities or organizations, could be useful in acting as a gateway for those firms that were looking to work over there. So, kind of just, what did you mean when you said that? And just some thoughts on that, if you can.
So a good way is to look at different countries around the world and how much exports the UK and Germany respectively send to those countries. And some of these countries that have very close historical links with the UK, South Africa, for instance, you'll unfortunately find the UK a lot further down the list of exporters to those countries than Germany. So we have lost grounds just generally. Germany has a very different kind of model and approach to exports compared to the UK, and it is almost stereotypically rather more kind of regimented, whereby chambers of commerce and others, companies of particular sectors have to belong to them and have to pay in, and as a result are part of a much more kind of integrated system. I'm not sure that would work here in the UK. Neither, by the way, with the French model, which tends to be far more informal and relationship based and fraught with reputational issues, in my view. As a result, we have to come up with our own British way of coordinating more effectively. But coordinate better, we must absolutely do. And as Matt and Martin picked up on, bodies like IUK, which I think, which BI is on the board of as well, but also through groupings such as BEI and our infrastructure working group, which I think, again, most of the companies on the call are a part of, are really important for coordinating with government to find a more effective model to promote exports.
Thanks, Tom. Question from George Abraham that I'm going to address to Alex Challoner, and it's back across the pond again. With the change of administration in the US, George says that there's highly likely to be more involvement globally from US relations, investment and infrastructure, potentially, particularly in Africa, George says. How's that going to position UK companies and their agility to win business going forward? So, if America becomes more active in different parts of the world, how does that leave UK firms in that situation? Alex, your thoughts on that?
I think it could be quite transformative, but there's a big if here. The British Embassy in Washington had to change gear very significantly in the last couple of months, when it became pretty clear that President Trump, was not going to win this election. And historically, I think Britain has always had a slightly more difficult relationship with a democratic president, particularly when it comes to our colonial past, as we saw with President Obama. So I think there are significant opportunities, but we're going to have to work very hard on it. British business, particularly in Washington, has really got to get under the skin of what this administration is about, and use that leverage with their with opportunities that are created in Africa. I mean, it's quite clear we need much bigger US involvement in Africa. I mean, for way too long, I think we've kind of sort of surrendered a little bit of that to China for all obvious reasons that we know about. And I think America has Africa very high on its agenda at the moment. That is going to be a source of continued tension in the world. And Africa could well be the sort of the geopolitical area where that is going to play out. I would say British businesses really do need to hitch their wagons fairly quickly, as I said, to that Biden administration and be part of that conversation going forward.
Thanks, Alex, for that. I've got something to throw at Matt Crossman now, if I may, and that is, how confident are you? It's probably an unfair question, but it's never stopped me asking them before. How confident are you in the UK government in delivering and batting forcefully globally for UK infrastructure post-COVID, and also with Brexit in 2021? What's your view on that? What we're likely to see in that area?
Thanks, Andy. I think infrastructure will continue to be a real priority for the UK government and for different parts of the UK government. So we've talked earlier today about the FCDO and the work that DFID has been doing and the funding they've put into infrastructure. They're developing a major new programme focusing on infrastructure in developing markets. So I think there's definitely a continuing emphasis there. There's also a continuing emphasis from the Department for International Trade. We're trying to be a bit more strategic. We're trying to be a bit more joined up, but we see a real opportunity in infrastructure. And I think there will be also the global emphasis on infrastructure. So as I said before, we're not going to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't get the infrastructure right. We're not going to achieve net zero. We're not going to be resilient to climate change if we don't get the infrastructure right. So I think what we'll see over the coming months, particularly in the run up to COP26 later next year, is a real continuing emphasis on infrastructure. And I'm confident that will be there from the UK government as well as from governments around the globe.
Thanks for that, Matt. Just turning to Nathan quickly. Obviously, you guys do quite a lot of work in the international markets. Turning ahead to next year, do you think you're likely to do even more work in 2021, given all of the challenges that we've actually got? Do you still believe that it'll be a growth area for your organisation's work?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we've had a good run over the last couple of weeks in terms of new projects being awarded to us, and I think the reason for that is we developed some capability when lockdown really started to kick in terms of virtual tools, being able to engage with stakeholders more comprehensively without needing to travel. So we're able now to give colleagues headsets, talk to them from the UK. We can walk through spaces in a digital fashion with them. And really what we're focused on now is making sure that we try to minimise the travel risk that is a burden really to projects being successful. That quick adaptation as a business, I suppose, is going to be fundamental for us being successful in the future, and it's paying dividends so far. So we're going to continue to invest in that digital and technical space so that we continue to grow and reduce our own carbon footprints in the way that we travel around the world delivering projects.
Thanks for that, Nathan. The sustainability net zero's already been mentioned, and I'm just going to quickly, go around some of our speakers with this particular question, and that is looking ahead to COP26. How can the construction and infrastructure sector take advantage of that on an international scale in terms of the work and the expertise that it actually carries out? And if I start off with Patricia on that, what's your view in relation to that?
Well, we're already, seeing, big opportunities within the UK on the refit and the retrofit programs. So, there is a lot of existing assets that need to be converted to, a carbon neutral equation. So there's massive work bank, I think, for us to build CV, critical mass and capability that we can then see that we can absolutely export. When then you look at, the carbon technologies, the fact that, many companies now have to convert their energy sources to solar or renewables, as well as the big infrastructure, carbon agenda of the new nuclear and, et cetera. So, I think there's just boundless amounts of opportunity really on the carbon equation. And one of the key things that we're focusing on is how do we bring the carbon equation? We measure a lot of things, we count a lot of things for clients. And carbon calculation now is becoming part of our mainstream offer really for clients, so that they're putting the carbon agenda at the heart of any program and any investment decision. So I think that that's where we can really see the mass scale of the carbon opportunity, and then we can also see some real discrete programs emerging, as well as the big chunky opportunities like power generation, etc.
Thanks for that, Patricia. I've got a couple of questions left, and I'm going to go around the whole panel with all of these. So if we can have sort of short, sharp answers, that'd be really good. I think the first one might help those on attending the meeting as well, with a bit of intelligence. I'm not expecting anybody here, by the way, to give away any trade secrets or business confidences or anything like that. And I know you won't. But the first question is, if you had to pick maybe three markets, either emerging markets or growth markets in the world, what would they be at the moment, looking ahead to 2021? Three sort of potential hot areas for people to be looking at going forward into next year. And the first person I'm going to ask that question to is Tom Cargill. Tom, your view on that one?
Okay, well, we actually maintain a kind of internal registry of those markets in the world that we think offers most opportunity for UK companies looking to export. And I won't run you through all of them, but the three that I would, maybe the unusual ones that I'd encourage people to look at is firstly Peru, where the UK's recently signed this groundbreaking G2G agreement to undertake infrastructure work, and where there's a lot of follow-up work needs to be done, and there's a huge amount of support on offer to help you. The second one is Indonesia, which is a tricky market to operate in, but there are huge infrastructure plans there to not only move the capital, but a number of other cities. And then the third one, which is a bit of a googly, is Ghana. Ghana's just about to have elections any day now. It's got a curiously, in the region, democratic tradition. You do actually see changes of government, and we may see a bit of bumpiness while that sorts itself out. But whoever wins is going to be very close to the UK government. It's only 5 hours flight. It's a huge opportunity for UK business there.
Okay, thanks for that. Three areas, three countries. Bruce, your view on that, briefly, if you can. And just unmute yourself as well.
I'm going to give you 3 areas from very different perspectives. So I think China is still very important for us because China is still rapidly developing their own expertise, hungry for external outsourced expertise. So I would identify China, particularly from a climate point of view. I think anywhere in the world that is experiencing everywhere in the world is going to be needing to invest in infrastructure going forward. There's no question about that. So what are the hot spots? What are the areas that the UK can maximise in those areas? I would agree with Tom. South America, Central America, climate change is a big impact there, and also over in the Far East, sort of Malaysia, Philippines, etc., and in Indonesia. So I'd suggest those 3 areas in particular. Can I just make a point? One particular point, particularly whilst we've got Matt on the call. I don't think British expertise should be looking to the government to how the government can help companies in the UK sell internationally. I think we should be much more flipping it around the other way and to say, how can we harness the great British expertise that we've got to help British foreign policy, to help position ourselves post-Brexit in the world? And I'd just like to shift it around the other way if we can, from that perspective.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Tom. Might as well go to Matt next. Your 3 areas, please. And again, if you can be brief, because we're running out of time.
Thanks, Andy. I'll be really brief. I'll caveat it though. So my caveat would be different sectors will have different opportunities in different markets. So I think, I'll be really, really general. And I think there's an enormous opportunity in emerging markets. So I would be looking at South America, I would be looking at Africa, and I would be looking at Southeast Asia. I'd highlight particular markets for particular sectors within those regions. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Matt. Nathan, what would your 3 be?
So it's slightly different. I mean, the Sahel region in Africa is obviously receiving quite a lot of investment from UK government. That's intended to grow our trade. So it's certainly an area I think is probably worth looking at. South America, as well, as Matt just pointed out. But another sort of principle I was going to raise is that different nations have a tendency to develop their own infrastructure domestically, innovate around that infrastructure, and then look to export it. And I'm looking at the moment in Japan at how they're developing their own maglev capability, with a view that they will then export that capability into other areas. And if we look at what we've got in the UK, we've got probably a world-leading approach to renewable energy. And so rather than trying to sort of target too many locations at the moment, perhaps looking at where the demand will be, where we've actually got a demonstrable track record of delivering infrastructure in the UK that then can be exported on a world-leading basis.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Nathan. Alex, your view on 3 hot areas that people should be beating off to as soon as possible.
I mean, agree with one of the earlier speakers, definitely China, for different reasons. I mean, look, if there's ever going to be a winner out of COVID, it would be China. I mean, they have bounced back just dramatically. And to be honest with you, I think they're going to be powering the global economy for quite a while to come. And it's interesting to see that President Xi has been quite early on to accept that President Biden has won. One country we haven't mentioned, I don't want to discount Russia. I mean, it often is a challenge. But when you think about, global warming, is going to be inevitable for a period. There's going to be some really interesting transformations, particular with, the tundra, all of those geographic areas, minerals, infrastructure is going to get very exciting. So don't discount Russia. And as Tommy said before, I think Central America, there's been some really interesting things developing out of Central America.
Thanks very much, Alex. Martin, your view on the 3 sort of key areas do you think will be attractive going forward into 2021 and beyond?
Well, Andy, I've been racking my brain in the last 2 minutes to try and work out, what advice I would put forward, and I've been listening to my colleagues talk. And I'm not so sure I agree with most of those countries, because from a contractor's perspective, it's difficult to win work on the ground in those countries because local competition is tough. Unless there is strong government-to-government support, because as Matt mentions in Peru, for example, there is a strong government-to-government, and therefore that helps to kind of level the playing field. But having said that, one of my colleagues mentioned Ghana. I do see Ghana as a good place to do business. It's Africa for beginners in some respect. It's stable. Kenya. And I'm going to throw a curveball out there because I do see opportunity, and that's a country like Vietnam. It's a bit of a curveball.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. I'm getting loads of ideas for our international forward features here for infrastructure intelligence. Not why I asked the question, I hasten to add. Patricia, what would your three be? You've had more time than everyone else to rack their brains. So what's your view on the three to watch?
Yeah, that's a benefit, but it's also, a disadvantage, isn't it? Because everyone's already said it. So now I've been trying to strike off my list so that I can still be original. We approach it slightly differently, I guess, from where we can see real opportunity in the marriage of our current capability, our spread, our relationships, etc., and also where we see that opportunity. And the big area I think that no one's really talked about is that North American market, just because of sheer scale. It's, it has its challenges to do business in, largely because of the fragmentation of the political arrangement. But, it's just such a huge market to go at. We've got it as one of our key planks of our strategy. And that's for the US as well as Canada, actually. And Canada is a lot easier, for us to move people around and, get our capability there. I think the other key market for us, we sort of bookend the world, if you like, with North America, the Middle East, which continues to yield big opportunities, particularly in Saudi Arabia, and then also in Australia, where we've really picked up a lot of really big, significant infrastructure schemes over the years. So we can see those markets, continuing to be strong. And then I think the other developing markets are much more medium and longer term plays. And even China, we've been in China for a long time. We still see it as a very, very long-term play because of the cultural challenges, really, of trading there.
Thanks very much indeed for that. We're pretty much out of time, but I just want to return to Tom Cargill from British Expertise International that we have been working with quite closely on this particular event, just to sort of give us a very brief sort of some I suppose closing observations really, and if you can include in there as well maybe what your top tip might be for firms working overseas as well, apart from joining British Expertise International of course. But Tom, briefly sum it up for us if you can.
Oh well, let me be that brazen then. Well, I tell you what, I'll end with a quote. Matt gave us a quote. I'll give you a Dr. Henry Kissinger quote. No foreign policy, no matter how ingenious, will succeed if it is born.
Lost him.
Yeah,
we've lost you there, Tom. I don't know whether or not if you can just unmute and give us your Henry Kissinger quote again. But I think we might have lost you altogether. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're back. Give us that Henry Kissinger quote again. It was such a big build-up. We need to hear it.
Okay. So no foreign policy, no matter how ingenious, will succeed if it is born in the minds of a few and carried in the hearts of none. So whether it is government supporting industry or industry supporting government, we're all going to have to collaborate and much more effectively in coming years. And, British Expertise International is absolutely fighting the good fight on that. So come and join us. And the more support we can have, the more effective we can be on behalf of all of the UK's infrastructure exports.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Some great quotes there from US presidents past, including Kissinger, who wasn't the US president, of course. Philosophy, international insight, you get it all on Infrastructure Intelligence Live events. So thanks very much to all our panelists for their insights this morning and this afternoon. It's really, really appreciated. Thanks to Tom, to Bruce, to Patricia, to Alex, to Martin, to Matt, and to Nathan. Really, really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Thanks again as well to our strategic partner, to BECG, for their support for today, and again for Alex for his insights as well. Just a final reminder to our audience, don't miss the final event of this year, the final Infrastructure Intelligence Live event, where we will be looking ahead to 2021 and looking back on what someone on today's panel called, a quite unprecedented and incredible year, and hopefully one that we won't see the like of again. So don't miss that one on the 11th of December. Everyone will get an email after this event, which will give you that link. And it'll also give a link to the report of this event that we'll have up on our website this afternoon, and also a recording so that our panelists can see themselves in glorious Technicolor to help ease themselves in to the weekend. But thanks very much to everybody. Thanks to our audience. That's it from us. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks very much. Wave bye-bye, everybody. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Cheers.